Before we get started with the farmer panel discussion, we felt it was important to share a little bit about the nutrient loss reduction strategy, so I will be quick. So in your fields, nutrient loss can reduce yield potential and profits. When nutrients leave the field, they don't just disappear. Locally, these lost nutrients can affect drinking water and recreation sites, and downstream, the cumulative effect from the 31 states in the Mississippi River Basin creates an oxygen-poor area in the Gulf known as the hypoxic zone. Though understanding that nutrient loss impacts the Gulf is important, the goal of today is to demonstrate how keeping nutrients in your field through utilizing cover crops can support your bottom line and help meet the nutrient loss reduction strategy goals. So the nutrient loss reduction strategy was created through a collaborative effort by groups like the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and the University of Illinois. And it's this collaborative effort that is one way in which the Illinois strategy is unique from other states' strategies. Other states are seeing the value of our partnerships and are adopting similar strategies. Now, the Illinois plan was released in 2015 to address nutrient loans from urban stormwater, point sources, and agricultural non-point sources. It's important to note that the plan is not saying agriculture is the only source of nutrient loss, but recognizing that nutrient loss comes from multiple sectors that all need to be addressed for us to reach our goals. Nutrient loss and hypoxia impact our local water bodies and water quality. So when we are working to address nutrient loss, it isn't just to reduce the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf, but also to address local concerns. Now, the end goal of our strategy is to reduce total nitrogen and total phosphorus losses by 45%. Illinois has not yet adopted a date to reach this goal. So a large amount of the nutrients leaving Illinois are attributed to agriculture, and the breakdown on this slide is from the original strategy. Now, this breakdown of contributions attributed to each source, and you'll notice that the agriculture is a large contributor of both total nitrogen and nitrate nitrogen. We're talking about 80%, and about half of the total phosphorus. And this is why agriculture is a focal point, not only for me, but for many of our NLRS partners. And I want to also point out our priority watersheds, which are an element that is required for each state strategy. Now in Illinois, our priority watersheds were identified in the original strategy, and this map is available on Illinois EPA's website. The outlined watersheds are those that could have the greatest impact on reducing nutrient loss in Illinois. And the blue watersheds are nitrogen priority watersheds, and the orange are the phosphorus priority watersheds. The watersheds that are served by Illinois Extension's Watershed Outreach Associates are the Lower Rock and the Mississippi North Central or the Flint Henderson. And they are served by Nicole Haverback. And the Embra and the Low Wabash are served by Luke Zwilling. And I am a statewide educator, so I support the work that the Watershed Outreach Associates are doing, as well as to serve the part of the state that they don't cover. So cover crops are the only in-field practice that have both a nitrogen and phosphorus reduction efficiency in our strategy. So along with providing many additional benefits, which we're going to hear about shortly. Cover crop adoption is around 6% on our over 21 million acres of row crops, and that was according to the 2022 NASS survey. So our team has developed a cover crop program as one method we are working to increase cover crop adoption rates. And there are several barriers to adoption of cover crops. So the goal of this program is to remove the cost of the seed, which is one way that we are trying to increase adoption. And we also continually try to identify and overcome barriers to adoption. So the cover crop program targets farmers who are new or newer to cover crops, and it began in 2019. Now, over the years, there have been some changes to the program, but the goal has remained the same, providing an opportunity to farmers to try cover crops by reducing some of the risk. This year, we are partnering with Whiteside, Mercer, Carroll, and Coles County to provide free seed to their farmers. Now, something new we're trying this year is partnering with American Farmland Trust on their Farmer-Led Advances for Soil Health, or FLASH program. Now, one aspect of this program is called Batch and Grow, which, in addition to providing seed, also provides financial support for planting the cover crop. Now, since the program began, free cover crop seed has been provided to more than 15,000 acres within our NLRS priority watersheds. And in 2025, we had 63 farmers participate in the program. Now, we're very appreciative to the Illinois Soybean Association for their continued financial support for this program. And we are using this and to continually build our partnership with our local soil and waters. And so we would encourage you, if you live in one of those counties, to reach out to your soil and water and find out how to participate. And now we're going to turn things over to our farmer panelists. So I really want to, first of all, say thank you to Greg, Brent, and Adam for being with us today. Now, to start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation? And Greg, would you mind going first?
It would be fine. Thank you for having me for this presentation. I'm always interested in meeting other panelists and that too. We all have a lot more in common than we have in different. I'm from Daviess County, and if you don't exactly know where that's at, I live about 15 miles south of the Wisconsin border and approximately 45 miles east of the Mississippi River. So we are in the far northwestern county. We're in the driftless area, so we have not been glaciated here. Our topography rolls fairly well in the northeastern. I'm in the southeastern part of the county. The northeast part of the county was partially glaciated, and it's flatter, and the soil types, of course, are different up there than what we farm with. We do have some very productive ground, even the hillsides, the clay loams. If they're farmed properly, they'll get extremely good yields. I've been no-tilling for quite a few years, experimenting back in the 70s when I started farming, late 70s when I started farming. And as of today, we're 100% no-till. We're 100% cover crops. We're non-GMO. We have not used any basically bought fertility except low rates of nitrogen since 2019. We plant all untreated seed at least for the last 4. I think this will be our 5th season. We do not use insecticides or fungicides, and basically we want to farm as similar as we can to nature. There again, I've been farming for about 51 years. Graduated in 1975 and had rented a farm on shares at that time with my dad and a landlord, and then basically gone from there. I moved away from the home farm. My brother's on the home farm, and I've always been around livestock as far as hogs and cattle, and we still have cattle as of today. We rent, as of now, we own about 1,000 acres of land ourselves, and then we rent about 1,400 acres. And I do treat, when I go into a rental arrangement, I do treat all the landlords, the land that I'm renting, the same as mine. And I tell them that up front. And a lot of them years ago liked the way I had farmed, even back in my conventional days, you might say. And we've just kind of gone from there and got into the cover crops and more no-till, and it's been very good. We've actually installed quite a few waterways through the years, even on landlords' farms. I even did the work on those as far as shaping and different things. I really enjoy moving soil, moving dirt to make things to improve things. You might say we have filter strips of our own by creeks. We do have some CRP ground as far as mostly waterways. I do not have any field to CRP, but we do rent land, and then the landlords do have. We've helped the landlords enroll into CRP programs, and some of them have field border strips, different CRP practices. Actually, just last week we drone seeded clovers, a red clover on 78 acres of CRP ground for a landlord. I had that custom done, of course, but we're doing trying to do quite a few different things.
Thanks. Brent?
Well, we farm in south of Macomb, which is in southern McDonough County. We're about an hour east of where Missouri and Iowa come together. So that's we farm a real wide range of soil on our farms. We have some that's really flat black, really awesome soil, and then we farm some soil that's timber soil that's really, really rough, and some of it is so rough that almost shouldn't be farmed. And but I farm with my dad and my oldest son, and we have about 100 cow calf pairs, and we also custom feed hogs. Um, and my what Greg was mentioned was CRP. That's wildlife habitat is one of my biggest passions in life, and so I spend a lot of my free time doing stuff for Bob White, and that's uh, one of the things that I do for fun.
Thank you. Adam?
Located in Williamson County, Illinois, which is right at 50 mile from the southern tip and about 50 mile from the east and 50 mile from the west. Kind of give you an idea where I'm sitting. Very fortunate. Was raised on a farm that had went no-till, 100% no-till back in '83, and then when I came into the operation, we started with cover crops. So cover crops is all I've known from the very start. Currently, I'm at 800, just shade over 800 acres, own about 150. As far as conservation practices are concerned, like I said, I've been 100% cover crop. Well, we've been 100% cover crop since 2012, 50% cover crop before that. That's been the main focus of our strategy and program there, and expanding on that each year, depending upon the climate and when it is, we can get in the field to get it seeded.
Excellent. So moving on, the next question we have is, what were the biggest barriers or challenges that you encountered as you chose to implement cover crops on your farms, and what ultimately convinced you to implement cover crop practices in your farming operation? Brent, you want to? Oh,
Yeah, listening to Greg and Adam, our story is a little different. The main challenge that I have faced with conservation is probably been my family. And I mean, I love my dad, I love my whole family, but that has definitely been the biggest challenge. My dad is um, is very he's ex-military, so he's very structured. He likes to do the same thing every single day, and he likes to do the same thing every year. And I kind of joke with people that I like trying new things. We're definitely different in that way, and I kind of have an uncanny ability to question everything my dad does or ever has done. And so that can be a little bit challenging at times. But I like trying new things. I like testing. I like comparing different practices. But that's definitely been hard. And I know that, one of the things that kind of got us started in no-till, and we are almost all no-till now, but we had a worker that went to a field by mistake. He was supposed to take our plow, our ripper, and he took our vertical tillage tool instead. And a long story short, the field did really well, and it really got me questioning if it was really worth it to plow all of our cornstalk fields every year. So I remember I went to my dad and my grandpa at the time and said, I want to do some tests. I would like to try a test of the vertical till and not plow the whole field. And they really hated that idea. And I also kind of joke with people that, the only thing I can kind of compare to would be for a non-farmer to paint your living room, but leave a strip in the middle unpainted. And that's how my dad and grandpa felt about it. But they went along with it, and we started doing tests, and the results were showing that it really just wasn't paying to do all that heavy tillage. And so over time, we did that for several years, and then we started where we were only plowing half the field, and we did that for a few years, and then it got to where we were only plowing a strip in the center of the field, and the test just kept showing that the minimal till or no till was better. So that's kind of how it started. But another thing that I kind of think about too is that ditches or gullies in fields really bother me. And I know Dad doesn't like it, but Dad can go take a field cultivator and fill in the ditches in a field, and it doesn't really hurt him as much as it does me. And I look at, that soil left our field and it's never coming back. And so that's what really kind of led me to, so when I found out that we can do some of these conservation practices and keep our soil in our field and be more profitable, that was really exciting when that happened. So, and now we are trying, we definitely do a lot of cover crops now. Almost all of our corn stalks before soybeans have a cereal rye cover crop. So that's kind of our story.
Thank you. Adam?
As far as challenges are concerned, I would say early on, back in the late 90s, it was information. We started with cereal rye in front of soybeans and corn stalks, and the whole purpose of that was to build organic matter. We successfully were doing that, but nonetheless, we still wanted to figure out how to get it across all the acres. As we moved forward, the industry grew a little bit, and we were able to source good seed and so forth to move forward, and that allowed us to expand our operation. The biggest struggles I see most people with is the mindset on how to achieve it. You've got to change your entire scope of how you approach your equipment purchases, as well as your management practices. I really don't care what color piece of equipment you drive. If it doesn't work in the application, it is of no use for this operation. And that's the mindset that often holds most people back, is they are diehard a certain brand, even though that particular piece may not be best for the diversity that they're wanting to implement with cover crops. So we've always kept a real open mind as far as what equipment and so forth we were using. As far as seeding goes, that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that I hear is guys can't get it in the field. We've done it. We started with airplanes, drills, of course, by far the best. And we built a high boy seeder in 2013. That worked good, but nonetheless, the drill still outperforms it. Drones work very well. We've implemented those more and more as we move forward, as they don't get the cover crop seed tied up in the whirl of the corn plant like other seeding methods do before harvest. But as far as challenges, I would say that would be the only ones. I mean, the biggest challenge most operators have is their mindset, because if they do not keep an open mind and convince themselves they're going to make it work, they're destined to fail. So I can't really speak as far as anything that's really prohibited us from expanding other than our own mindset. And we've been pretty progressive on that.
Thank you. Greg?
I agree with everything that Adam and Brent said. I've experienced those things. The barriers might be, looking back now, it's a completely different management system, and it's a unique holistic management system. And maybe this is for someone that's more advanced, but as we started with cereal rye again, like Adam did. That's a no-brainer. We did it for erosion purposes, and I truly believe that no matter what cover crop you use, if it's even if a single species, that it does so many more things than just one object that you want it to do. That's the fun thing about this. We as farmers think if you do one thing, you get this one return. Well, with cover crops, it just does a tremendous amount of thing, like any plant does. So I think that was the big takeaway for me. And then of course nowadays we're into multi-species cover crops. We try to plant at least 4 different families at a minimum for soil health purposes. And then of course we're getting into the soil health arena more as the public even. And that's a very, very good system, because basically it all comes back to clean water, clean air. If we can get the soil health better, the system just makes sense. Mother Nature just makes sense how she does things. And we've basically disturbed her a lot with our conventional farming practices that we have today.
Right. Thank you. So we've been hearing about planning, and we all know that planning is essential for success. So what is your planning process to set yourself up for success? Adam, you want to take this one first?
Planting in regards to the cover crop, or what are you asking?
Well, just the whole system. So you have to make sure that you get the cover crops that meet your goals, as well as how are you going to terminate them in the spring or that kind of stuff.
So planting, like I touched on earlier, we've tried it all. We've pretty well settled on aerial applying with a drone before harvest, with in standing corn, and then we drill after soybean harvest. And with that being said, we still monitor soil moisture, because there's of no advantage to throw seed out in a drought and then run the risk if we get a small rain and it germinates and dies because it doesn't have enough moisture to survive. So we keep that monitored as we look at establishing the cover crop. As we go into the spring, I've done it all from roller crimping to terminating the ryegrass right after it breaks dormancy. Kind of where we're settling right now, we're taking the ryegrass out about after the second time we mow our yard. That's about ideal. Take the ryegrass out, because it is such a dense root structure. And with the weather patterns that we've experienced over the past 24 months, I can't have the amount of top growth that I like to have due to the extensive amount of rainfall that I've received in my area. The last 2 falls have been prohibitive on getting legumes established. If we can get legumes established, we'll still take the ryegrass out early and take the legumes to bloom. Maximum nitrogen production takes place right at bloom. So we try to get that to that point. As far as planting the cash crop and so forth, you've really got to pay attention to how your equipment is set up, because you want good openers, you want good closing wheels, and you have to pay attention to what works best on your operation. About 10 years ago, a group of farmers in my area, we all got together and tried many different types of closing wheels and so forth to see what was working best, and did some studies. That proved to be excellent research for all of us, and that helped guide what it was we were looking at. But still, nonetheless, what was working on some farms weren't working for other farmers. So termination wise, when we look at terminating the cover crop, I've done it with a drone. We do it with a ground rig. Last year, we did not get it killed as timely as I wished I would have, and that cost us some heartache as we move forward. But all in all, it's that's pretty well how we approach it.
Greg.
When I utilize cover crops, they're again in the driftless area. We farm some land that's probably in the 20% slope area easily. Not the whole field or farm, but there's pitches in that. But we farm a lot of 10% and above. And erosion is a big thing. It always has been. My father was the same way when he farmed. Contour strips, rotations, livestock, smaller farms back then. they had a rotation of 2 years corn, 1 year oats with seeding underneath, and then at least 3 years of forage or hay, you might say. And of course, nowadays we don't have that. Those are common practices throughout the whole state back in the 50s and 60s with the smaller farms and more livestock on every farm. But today we're more of a monocrop. And you can even say that with corn and soybean because we use pretty much the same fertility, the same herbicide, or I should say, just generally say pesticides and GMO seeds and different things, which is utilized in today's world, you might say. But my goal is with cover crops now is that I do want to try to keep a living root in that ground as long as I can throughout the year, and then we take advantage of the of livestock grazing on these cover crops too. I did have a few pictures. I don't know if you can put any of those up, Rachel, or not. It's totally up to you. But some of the things with the livestock that we try to do anyway, and I can explain that quick too. We've done like Adam has. We've done roller crimping. We've done drone seeding. We've done drilling. Actually, this is a picture of cover crops. Actually harvesting 60-inch row corn in a seeded cover crop. I won't get into the details here, but then we'll graze our cattle on those. There should be another picture there of mine with cattle in the background grazing. That's actually a summer annual after we took small grains off. This picture is probably taken in October, first part of October and in September, probably the 1st of October. And we do have virtual fencing, and we took a combination of peas, oats, wheat, and barley off of that, all grown together. And then we put that in a harvester silo. We harvested somewhat with moisture in it, and then we're finishing cattle out with that with about a 20% grain mix on top of that. So we're getting 5 different. Diversity is the key. Diversity on soil health, animal health, human health, what we eat, as long as it's good diversity. Here's a cover crop mix that we use, one of the many, but diversity is the key. All the different plants and families in there. This is 60-inch row corn that was harvested. You can kind of see the livestock, the cows in the background in the line, and that's where the virtual fencing has been. And then we'll work them across. We'll move them every day across there. This is an example of no-tilling. We try to plant as much green as we can. That's our objective. We don't like to see dust when we plant. Last year was a little trickier with the dry. It might be that way this year too, even in the cover crops. Actually, a lot of the dust comes out of the stalks. Soil, there's usually a little moisture there, but you do have some issues with that. But we try to keep all the soil in the field, and we can do that not only dust but erosion-wise too. We work with a group out of University of Wisconsin-Platteville. We've had probably for 6 or 7 years. We kind of mutually joined here, and they do a lot of the water sampling in different parameters, infiltration tests, rain out shelters, different things. But this is an example. Mine's on the left there with a no-till wheat. This was done a couple years ago. It's not a side-by-side. It was the same rainfall event the same day. Mine had, I had 9/10 more rain per acre than the one on the right, and the one on the right was an alfalfa, and then a conventional tilled corn ground above this flume. And there's quite a difference in the loss of soil. And of course, with the loss of soil, you have pesticides, all your nutrients, basically everything you don't want to lose. And that's what is caught by the flumes anyway. So these are why we do what we do. If you have erosion, you can't build soil. It's simple as that. A dime thickness of soil loss per acre is 5 ton, and that 5 ton number, in my opinion, is way too high. We should be down. We should want to lose less than a ton, and we can do that with the practices that all 3 of us are talking about here today.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was sharing the wrong slide, so I apologize. Um, I see there's a couple questions in the chat. Nicole or Luke, could you share what those are?
Yeah, our first question is, Adam, do you grow much wheat? Are you incorporating covers after double crop beans?
No, I do not have wheat on my operation. My soils have never been drained well enough to allow that to survive throughout the winter. As far as cover crops after late planted beans, would last year would be the best example due to the fact that we were not able to get back in the field to get the beans planted until the end of June, 1st of July. With that being said, we were still out there, thank goodness, with the warm fall we had, and ryegrass was planted later in the season last year. We didn't get a lot of top growth, but the roots are still growing today. And each warm spell that we see, the ryegrass is greening back up with each warm event. So we have been pretty fortunate on that.
Did you drill that in, like you said, you typically drill in post soybeans, that ryegrass?
Yes. Yeah, that was drilled in right after harvest.
Okay. I'm a little farther. I farm in Salem, just a little
Okay.
north of you, and I do have a lot of wheat in my rotation and trying to figure out how to get something. I tried aerially seeding into my double crop beans the last couple of years and had mixed success, but that's still something I'm dabbling with because I'd really like to get a legume and a brassica going before my corn the next year. But
I have always had marginal success with planting the cover crop before in the soybean harvest. And that's kind of why we just settled with drilling after the fact. The greatest challenge, what we struggled with early on, was too much of a dense cereal rye mat present in the soybean field. As we all know, if we plant soybeans into heavy cereal rye mat, that cereal rye mat will be present through that entire growing season up until about June of the following year. So we were getting weak seed to soil contact. And then also one thing that we had to watch, especially with that mat, was the cricket population we had, as it was detrimental to the seeds that we were aerial applying. And come harvest, and I'm sure many of you noticed this as you drive across the field, it was like seeing waves of crickets as the combine or the grain cart was going across the field. And crickets are an excellent seed predator. So be mindful of that as well as you look into aerial seeding. If you're not getting immediate emergence and germination and so forth, do be cautious of your insect pressure because they are beneficial because they're eating the weed seeds as well, but they are rough on a cover crop establishment.
do you think that seed size has any impact on how much seeds are predated?
Well, when it comes to your harder seeds like your legumes and so forth, or your brassicas, I don't believe they eat those as quickly as they do like your grass seed and your cereals and so forth, just because of the seed itself. But I know ryegrass is easily consumed by insects, and cereal rye, we always seem to find it pulled down in earthworm channels and so forth as well. So, which they're not prejudiced onto what they pull down. They'll pull anything down, but that's what I've encountered on my operation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And Brent, do you want to talk about your planning process?
I don't really have much for planning. I guess for our operation on the soybean side, we do plant green, and then we plan on coming back 3 to 5 days, 3 to 7 days after we plant to terminate the rye. And I couldn't help notice you did have that one picture that you pulled up a second ago with me and the rye. Do you have that? Because
Yes, I will try and make sure.
that's going to be 2 years ago this spring, and we were really worried that we had maybe not planned enough. And this is me standing in cereal rye right before we planted this field that day. I'm standing there, and it was kind of a perfect storm for this to happen. We, right after we harvested the corn the fall prior, we seeded the cereal rye, and it was really warm and nice and perfect moisture, not too wet, not too dry, just really came out of the ground, and it stayed a really warm winter and a warm early spring, and it was wet the following spring. And I think this is May 10th or May 11th. And it was absolutely shocking how much that rye grew in 2 weeks. And so my dad was really upset about this. And but we planted it and we just hope for the best because we had a few hundred acres of this. We did chop some, but of course we're not going to be able to chop that, all of it. But this is on a farm that is not, it's pretty flat. It's not very well drained. And the beans the following fall made 74. And that just happens to be what they've made the 3 years prior to that. This field always made 74. So I don't know if it really hurt us or helped us. I know that, but I do know this. This is the only field that we have that's with a farm manager. The landowners, some of them live in California. They're all over, multiple landowners. And so this is the only farm that we have with a field manager. And I was talking to him about this, and he thought it was great. He was really happy with 74. I think it may have hurt him a little bit, but the thing that really stuck out to me is that on this field, we sprayed this a couple days after we planted it and just terminated the rye, and we never sprayed again. And I do think we had something else with the glyphosate, but it was $24 an acre for our herbicide. And when I was visiting with this farm manager that fall, he said, we have had some of our farms where the herbicide on beans was $100 an acre. So that's $76 an acre savings in the herbicide. So, yeah, about seven bushels of beans made up in the herbicide. And so this past fall, I asked him if he wanted to do this again. He said, yeah, definitely. So I guess, this field is currently in cereal rye again. Now, I don't recommend probably doing this. But like I said, we were really worried about, but I guess it turned out okay.
All right, thank you. So let's see. One thing we often hear is that a farmer will try cover crops for a year or two and say it's not working. How do you respond to that? And what kept you going when adding cover crops to your operation has been a challenge? And Greg, I think it's your turn.
That's a tough one because everyone thinks different. Every producer thinks different. Landlords think different too. My theory always is if you do something once and it really, really works out great for you, and I've seen this through my career, and you think you hit the home run, you know all the answers, you'll never repeat it again. So going to the opposite end of the spectrum, if it doesn't work out so well for you, keep trying. This does make sense. And a lot of times, I truly believe that you should invest all the money yourself in these cover crops instead of programs, and then you'd be more vested in it. And do it on even if you farm X amount of acres, do it on even 1 or 2% of your acres if you don't feel comfortable, but do it you use the same field. At least I'm going to say my theory has always been too, when farmers try something new, piece of equipment, a new technique, going from 30-inch row corn. We had a neighbor did that a number of years ago. 30-inch row corn went to 20-inch row corn and tried to strip till with that and then put all the nutrients in that 20-inch row. In our topography, a lot of people thought that was pretty good. Actually, 2 farmers did that at the same time. And I said, well, if they're doing that 5 years from now, that means it's successful. They got things figured out and it'll work. But about 3 years into it, I'd heard they were having some issues with tracking and the RTK and different things, and it just wasn't working on the hills and the contours and stuff. So it just didn't work for them. At least they tried it. But as far as the cover crops, it's the most natural thing that you can do. That's what Mother Nature does, is cover the land. If you have a piece of property and you do nothing with it, she will cover it with whatever needs to be on that property to make it better, on that land to make it better. So that's kind of my idea. And it is like was mentioned before, it's a mental game. It really is. But it makes so much sense for all the benefits you get there again. And just going back to clean water and clean air. If you can keep that soil in the field, your water is clean, that your runoff is with all the residue you have in the field and water infiltration. There's so many benefits. I don't know why people really don't look at it more than they do today.
Thanks, Craig. Brent?
Yeah, so this is one thing that I was kind of excited to talk about. And the reason why that is because I tried no-till. It's been about 25 years ago, and mistakes were made. And we said, I just remember thinking, I'm done with this no-till stuff. This, no way that, and I was sitting here this morning and I was making a list of the mistakes that I made. And number one, probably number one was so this would have been in around 2000, and we used a John Deere 750 drill. We still have that drill. But we quit tillage cold turkey on the field we tried this on. And, I think that might be a little bit of a mistake. If I picked up my neighbor's field here and the heavy tillage, when that field was corn stalks before beans, I don't think I would plan on no-till on the beans. I would probably take a vertical tillage tool and chop up that residue, because it takes a few years to get your microorganisms really cooking, really breaking down the residue. And residue is a problem. For us anyway. So that's probably the first mistake we made, was probably not trying to gradually work into the no-till. The next one was something we didn't do. We did not increase our seeding rate. And so, when you're in no-till, rough conditions, cereal rye, all this stuff, I think it's important to increase your soybean seeding rate. We did increase our down pressure, but we probably didn't increase it enough. One thing from no-till in these years, it takes a lot of no-till sometimes to penetrate this really hard ground in certain conditions, especially on the really white dirt. On the black dirt, it seems like you can get by with anything, but on the really tough timber soil, that can turn to concrete. Now, maybe the cover crops might help with that, but another thing that we didn't do that was probably the easiest thing in the world to do, that if I could go back and tell my younger self of 25 years ago, if I could only do one thing differently, I'd tell myself to plant the beans at an angle. So easy to do. Does cost nothing. And what happens is, if we didn't know, I didn't know any better. I didn't do any research before I just went into no-till. And I didn't talk to anybody who was doing it. So those were probably my first mistake. But, I didn't plant at an angle. I planted it exactly straight, the same as we planted the corn. And what we find now that happens is that we get a disc opener that gets stuck on top of the prior year's corn stalk row, and we're not getting the depth on those rows. And so if you're on, 15-inch row beans, and you have half of them directly on top of prior year corn row, that's not going to go well. So planting on angle, and that gets those disc openers off of those corn rows for a higher percentage of the time. So that was a big one. That was a big mistake. So what we had happen, we just didn't, for a couple of years, we had horrible stands of beans. We didn't increase our seeding rate. We didn't have enough down pressure, and we didn't plant at an angle, and we had a horrible stand. And that caused a lot of our, I'm sure that was a lot of our yield problem. We had really thin stands. But another part of it, being 23 at the time, I did not know that the beans would be shorter. And now I know that that's to be expected, but we're not trying to grow. We're not in a competition to see how tall plants we can get. We want pods. We want as many pods, doesn't matter how tall it is, but when you're 23 and the beans are shorter, that's a problem. And I remember being in the combine, and we didn't have in year 2000, we didn't have scales on the ARG wagon like we do now. We didn't really have a good way of weighing a test, anyways. But I'll be honest with you, just in the combine, seeing that the beans were shorter, I had already made up my mind. I did not want no-till. But now that I'm older and I know to expect that, I'm not going to say it's still a little hard when you drive down the road and you look at the neighbor's beans and they're 10 inches taller than yours. It's still a little hard even for me, but it's definitely hard. It's definitely harder for my dad and my oldest son. So yeah, if I would have known those, we probably would have switched over to no-till a lot sooner than we did.
Adam?
We'll just pause a moment. Brent, we do have a question for you in the chat. So is that field going to be, is that field going back to beans, or you put rye out in front of corn this season? I assume you would want to get ahead of it, if so.
Yes, so that field that I was standing in is what he's asking about. And so that picture was taken in the spring of 23. Last year, that field was rotated to corn, and we use a little bit. We use triticale instead of cereal rye. We just do a little bit of cover crops before corn only in our really erodible areas. So that field only had a couple strips of triticale. I'm not sure which ways to say that, but it just had a couple strips in the most erodible spots of that field. And then last fall, after we harvested that corn, we seeded it back to cereal rye.
Thank you. Adam?
So I run into this quite a bit, and I have to agree with Greg. I'm really in full support of not having the seed program subsidized because the farmers aren't vested. And I ran into this 15 years ago down in Southeast Missouri. All too often, you've got to keep in mind, we're trying to correct generations of abuse on soil. And unfortunately, in today's society, we expect instant gratification. And that's just not the case. I mean, you've got to keep in mind, you have destroyed the soil structure. You have destroyed the biology of the soil. And you've degraded actually the life of the soil because that washed down your creek. And now you're trying to get the next horizon to produce like the top horizon did that we've eroded off. So it takes a little bit of time. Typically, when I go on a farm on the seed side, especially, I tell a guy, give me half of your worst field for a minimum of 3 years, but I'd like to have 5. You've got to be in the right mindset to move forward with this management. But I want your worst soil because I want to show you what we can do through the transformation of utilization of cover crops. And your success, and I tell all growers this, any major Fortune 500 company spends X amount of dollars on research and development. And all too often, especially in the agriculture industry, it's only by the grace of God that we're still able to feed ourselves, as closed-minded as we are as an industry, and we get stuck in our ways for generations and don't look at new practices to adopt. And so they have to try new ways. And the problem of it is when farmers only give themselves 2 or 3 years, a multitude of things are happening. Keep in mind, each year we only get one shot to plant that crop. So we may have the wrong closing wheels on our planter. We may let our cover crop go too long. We may have had a rain event that tanked that. So it takes several years to fine tune this program. And like I said, I am at year 28 or 29 this year on cover crops. We've got a pretty good idea how I want my equipment set up and what I want my cover crop program is. But to tell you we've got it figured out would be an absolute lie because each year, like I said, my climate has changed. The past 2 years, we've had torrential downpours in the spring and excessive moisture. I know last year, by the end of June, we had 40 of our 54 average inches of rainfall before July. And so we've had to completely change how we manage our program because Mother Nature changes. And I think that's key with any successful business is you are constantly evolving your business and adapting to whatever forces you are combating at that time. And that's the problem that we run into. But if a guy is going to get on cover crops, two things need to happen. One, he needs to give himself 5 years to see the transformation take place in the soil. And two, he needs to work with a seed salesman that has experience other than just selling seed, because there's a lot of different variables that you have to take into account when it comes to your cover crop and so forth that most people, especially if you're buying off the co-ops, and keep in mind, and I'm not attacking anybody on this, but a lot of your seed salesmen are there to make a dollar, and they've not experienced real world situations that you're going to combat on your operation. So it's crucial to team up with somebody that is going to be 100% transparent and honest with you. And when it comes to success with cover crops, truthfully, when guys speak and they don't give the whole truth, that sets guys up for failure too, because we hear of people that can do things, but they don't disclose that they're pulling manure off the neighboring farm and so forth. And we don't get the whole story. And that's another challenge that guys encounter. But as a rule of thumb, when it comes to establishing cover crops on your operation, take 40, take 80 acres. I don't care. Give yourself 5 years, be honest with yourself and make an honest attempt and pay attention. Because truthfully, you can see as much through the growth of the cover crop as many of your other agronomic practices as anything, because you're monitoring that when you're not trying to keep track of the growing stage of your crop on what needs to be applied and so forth. And your cover crop will tell you if you're over applying on units of nitrogen, if your seeding depth is varying amongst your planter, if your residue coming out of the combine is getting evenly spread, you can see your problems there. Your cover crops tell the story much faster than your cash crops will.
All right. Thank you. We actually have a question in the chat. It's from Alicia, and she says, I've asked our tenant to use cover crops. Last year, he harvested quite late and the cover crop didn't cover well. Is there a date after which it's too late to plant a cover crop? And I think it's Brent's turn.
Oh yeah, I probably would have some questions to answer that question. What was the cover crop that was seeded, and then also what was the seeding method? But I know that, we used to worry about getting our cereal rye seeded as soon as we could, until that picture of me standing in the chin high rye happened. Now I'm not quite so paranoid about getting the seed early, and so we try to do it as early as possible. But cereal rye, which is what we use the most of, we've of course, it also depends on what part of the state you're in too, right? Because Greg and Adam can definitely contest to that. Look how different the stories are going to be between the three of us. But if we're in the middle of Illinois, we've seed cereal rye in November. And I mean, it doesn't get very tall a lot of times in the wintertime, but it always seems to come back in the spring. Although this year might be a little different because it was so cold with no snow cover for a short period.
Adam?
Sorry, I've got 3 screens open and it keeps jumping. Yeah, so seeding date is extremely crucial and depend upon where you're at. Midwest Cover Crop Council on their website has a seeding date chart that is county specific. They've worked on that for years on perfecting that. That is an excellent tool to utilize when it comes to establishing the cover crop, is the Midwest Cover Crop Council website. But you have to keep in mind, you've got to know what it is you're trying to achieve. And each year is different. Like I stated, we got our beans planted much like double crop beans last year, the end of June, 1st July. And then we seeded, we were able to drill ryegrass after that. Was I gambling? Absolutely. I'm not going to deny that. However, I was also paying attention to my warm soil temperatures that I still had going into the fall. Had I had a cooler, wetter fall, I would not have had success, and I would have had to pivot and change my plan. Where I'm at geographically, and this stands true for most of the state, you can take cereal rye up into mid-November. You're going to see minute top growth, but and this is with any cover crop, as long as your roots are below the frost line, your roots are going to continue to grow. keep in mind the reason that we plant cover crops in the fall is because anything seeded in the fall, much like when you're seeding pasture or hay ground or so forth, the plant is going to survival mode. So it is setting roots. So that's why we want to seed in the fall. When we plant in the spring, it goes to top growth because it's chasing reproductive. With the enhancement of cover crops in the soil, root growth is crucial because that's where we pull about 56% of our organic matter. That's how we work this ground. That's how we create better aggregate stability and so forth, is through root development. When it comes to seeding date and so forth, you have to keep in mind your legumes and so forth are going to shut off before your cereals. Ryegrass, crimson clover shuts off earlier than vetch in my area most of the time. Ryegrass, I can push it into the mid-October without any problem. Cereal rye, we take longer. If I'm going in front of corn and I want to see crimson clover and so forth succeed, what we'll do, we'll put oats in there with it. And the reason we do that, even with ryegrass, spring oats, as a rule of thumb, grow pretty rapidly in the fall. And so what we're doing, we're trying to protect the crown of that plant of the ryegrass or the crimson from the cold, harsh winds that we have. And by those oats taking off and growing, we're able to minimize the amount of cold weather kill because we have protected that plant. So you have to adjust your seeding plan as well to make sure that you are setting yourself up with success. But when it comes to, yes, it was a late harvest last year, that is when guys have to remember there's more than one way to get from point A to point B. That's when we pull out our aerial seeding and so forth. That's when we get it out there and we get that established. Ideally, we harvest corn with 4 to 6 inches of growth on our cover crops, and as soon as the sunlight hits it, it blows up and we're happy. So do we have success every year? Absolutely not. But 8 out of 10 years, we have pretty good success out of that. Ideally, I would much rather drill all my cover crops, but practicality of it is weather and labor become an issue, and that's what we have to monitor. And we are managers, so it's crucial that we actually manage how we're running our operation with the challenges that we're presented each growing season.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. And the cover crop tool from the Midwest Cover Crop Council is in the chat if you are interested. Greg, do you have anything you want to add?
I'll keep it short and sweet. They covered this very nicely. Up here in Northwest Illinois, there again, to answer the question, yeah, not knowing exactly all the seedings and different things too. And I agree that we've actually seeded in particular years, actually cereal rye, even the first couple of days of January. That one year, I think there was only a couple months we did not have the drill in the field. As far as even in the spring, we had an earlier spring too. But what we've seen too with, well, let's go this year. We have quite a number of cereal rye with the dryness and that we had seeded. And sometimes we'll even use winter wheat as cover crop also, but it's not exposed. It's not above the ground. That root's there. The root system is there. And I definitely agree with Adam that it does these overwintering crops will put that root system down. They do not get much top growth. That's how they're designed. And I guess if this was last year's seeding and depending what was put down, if it was a winter cereal, by spring it will green up. We've had things greening up here, like I said, the last couple of weeks before it got cold again. And it's going to frost off now, but it will be there in the spring if you do have cereal rye or wheat or triticale, whatever. It will grow. It will be there in the spring, as long as your germ test on your seed was good. Quality of seed, of course, makes a difference. What we try to do even after soybeans, and usually we harvest soybeans around the 25th of September on. We'll try to get summer annuals with just a dab of wheat in there that will go into corn the following spring. But we'll try to get at least 4 or 5 different families in there, some legumes, even some brassicas. We know we won't get a tremendous amount of growth before frost, depending on that might come any particular year. But we get the different families in there, and then basically you're inoculating that soil, even though you may not have that flush or real tall, lush growth, but that seed and the roots will inoculate that soil and biology wise changed things enough that it is very advantageous for the corn crop the next year.
Right. Thank you. One of the questions that was submitted by one of our participants is, have you ever worked with land easements or considered integrating hemp production into your operation? Adam, do you want to take this one first?
Not sure what the question is with land easements as far, I assume, for accessing things. No, I've not encountered that. Hemp production, no, I'm not. I don't have any interest in that, so I have not pursued that.
Greg?
Easement wise, no. Haven't done anything with that either. Depending what your object is with your land, that's all consideration as far as hemp production. There was a number of years ago when the hemp craze was going, a lot of farmers tried hemp up this way, and unfortunately unsuccessfully. And that's pretty much a bygone product here right now. So I would say no, basically no. I have not tried hemp myself. Thank heavens.
Brent?
No, I don't have any experience with easements.
All right. Thank you. So the next question what would you tell someone who is curious about conservation but unsure if the investment is worth it, especially with the risk and decreased yields? And what are some of the non-monetary benefits that you have observed? And I know you've all shared some of those, but maybe we can kind of put it all together. Greg, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, my mantra has always been that yield does not pay the bills; it's profit per acre. And we have in our practices, what we do is my yields are not as good as they were before I started the system, you might say. In 2019, we went cold turkey with everything, and our yields gradually decreased. And the reason for that is I think a lot of it is because I experiment way too much. Last year, for instance, we had tried a herbicide that we found out that shouldn't have been used to terminate cereal rye and wheat ahead of corn, and it cost me a minimum of 30 bushel an acre up to 80 bushel an acre on 300 acres. So that is not a positive thing, but I'll tell you, I paid a lot of tuition, and I will not do that again. And I'm not afraid to tell other farmers about the situation either. Financially, my idea was, even when I started cover crops, if it cost me, say, $40 or $50 an acre to seed costs, establish the crop, terminate the crop. If cover crops are going to do what they're supposed to do, take those dollars and take them out of your fertility budget. Your net neutral on cost, and I'll almost guarantee you probably aren't going to see any difference in your yield. And if not, you'll probably see more benefits than you do negatives if you do have a few less bushels. So investment wise, we have been more profitable, even with some of the mistakes that we've had through the years, just by decreasing inputs greatly. It's really been amazing. Even with some lower yields, we have been more profitable because of the amount of money we have not invested in that crop, but yet putting money in cover crop seeds to recycle nutrients, improve soil texture, quality, water infiltration. There's so many other benefits on the back side of these cover crops that are so much more profitable in the long run than the conventional system.
Brent?
Yeah, so it's non-monetary benefits, that list goes on, and the university research, you can go to all the organic matter and all that stuff. You can read about all of that, but some of the things that you can't really read about, I kind of like this question when I saw it, but a couple things that stick out in my mind, two things. One is that one thing that I really like about it is the ground stays a lot firmer in the fall. And I'll never forget uh, uh, one of the first years after we started no-tilling on a large scale after our disaster. We came back to it and we tried again. We started having results when I took the time to do a little research and maybe knew what I was doing this time. But I'll never forget, I was cutting beans, and it was a wet fall. It was muddy, and I was cutting beans, and I was just sailing right through and getting along fine. And right across the fence, my field wasn't tiled, but right across the fence, the guy who had plowed the fall prior, he was just cutting ruts all through his field. I couldn't believe, I was shocked, could not believe the difference of his harvesting experience versus mine. So in that, we see that happen all the time. It is a major gain, and that also helps. Another quick story too, and this happened to my dad, and I was glad it did. But when we were doing those tests, he was running on the no-tilled. He was cutting beans again, and it wasn't muddy, but it had kind of come a rain. It was barely dry enough to run. As far as the dampness of the beans, the ground was just a little mellow, a little soft, and he was getting along fine. But as soon as he hit that plowed strip, he started dragging up, and the head kept filling with dirt, and he had to keep getting out and cleaning the dirt out of the head, and he was in a pretty bad mood. And I was glad that he was having trouble on the plowed and not the no-till. So that, little things like that you don't really think about. You're not going to read about that, but I do think they cut a little nicer. But my last thing is that I am asked to talk to a class at our university at WIU, to their agronomy class every year. I'm a guest, and every year's the same. You can tell the farmer kids sit in the back, clear in the back, don't want to act like they have much interest. But at the end that we were asking questions, one of these farmer kids raised his hand and asked a question. He was real polite. No disrespect at all, but he raised his hand and he said, "Aren't you worried about the stuff that you're doing taking a lot more time?" And I thought, well, I'm glad you asked that, but actually just the opposite. When we pull out of the field, we farm around 3,500 acres, and I don't think we'd be able to do that if we were all conventional. But when in the spring, we keep the sprayer running and we pull out with our 60-foot corn planter and our 40-foot bean drill that we use on the cover crops. And both those planters, we just go to town planting. And the conventional guys have to keep a field cultivator running in front of both those planters. So that in order to be able to plant corn, plant beans at the same time, they'd have to have, not to mention 4 big tractors instead of 2, but they'd have to have 5 people running. And that logistically, that's hard enough to keep 3 things running. So, I just think that it's way, way easier to do what we do, especially when it comes to planting.
Thank you. Adam, and do you want me to pull up your slide with your soil on it? I think this would be a good.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to pull that up. To answer this question, the irony of this statement is typically brought up by those that do not understand what their equipment costs per acre are to start with. So when you go to looking at cover crop implementation and so forth, very seldom do guys actually look at what it costs them to run their tillage passes over the field. So they're already spending the money. And 9 times out of 10, they can save money by implementing cover crops and parking their tillage tool. It's really sad that as an industry, we take most of our agronomic guidance from our equipment salesmen. It's pretty pathetic, but nonetheless, that's what we encounter. When it comes to profitability and so forth and non-monetary gains, I can't speak on non-monetary gains because I continue to see it year in, year out. I picked up a farm back in 12, and then we picked up another farm 10 years later. Same soil types, same practices prior to us taking it over. but we were and planted the same day. I mean, once they enter our system, they're all managed pretty well the same as far as the intensity of our program. And on average, I'm seeing 4 bushel a year increase on corn each year, year in, year out through no-till and cover crops. But what I wanted to show on this slide in particular, those of us that understand soil understand the power of this picture. This is not attained through conventional tillage. This is not attained through non-conservation practices. What you want to see, and those of my friends that are blessed with good soil up north, I pray your soil looks like this consistently. That's not the case in my environment at all, because our soils are best for putting buildings on top of. We've got high clay content. But you want your soil to look like black cottage cheese. And what you can see on this, the importance, and if you want to see the gain, this picture speaks volumes, because you see the soil particles are all bound into larger soil particles, allowing better aggregate stability. And as we know, the larger the particles, the more room for air and water movement. This soil doesn't lay flat and compact. Its water holding capacity is substantially greater than those of my conventional work neighbors that they have. This is what we're working towards, and this is not achieved overnight, but I think the field this came off of had only been implemented cover crops and no-till for about 10 years. So we are able to make strides in that. When it comes to, so how is this achieved? This is achieved through the secretion of chemicals sugars and so forth from the roots and the exudates, and earthworm castings and so forth, bonding those soil particles together. This is how you build soil. This is how you raise a healthy crop. And that alone should speak volumes in itself. If you can't pull your soil apart and it just crumbles and falls apart, you've got much larger problems to be concerned about than the cost of the cover crop. When it comes to other non-monetary gains, I guess you could say, but like I said, they're all monetary gains. Once you get your nutrient cycling in place through the cover crop breaking down and that cycling taking place, we have seen phenomenons where I've carried nitrogen forward an entire growing season. And with the right rainfall and so forth, we have received nitrogen in a corn crop that we didn't apply, that boosted our yields because the nutrient cycling is taking place. I could speak on this for an hour, but I hope that answered most of your question. I know we're going to run out of time, but I'm very proud of this picture from the standpoint that we were able to do this solely through the use of cover crops and no-till and catering our program to improve our soils. And this speaks volumes in my area.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, I don't think that there's ever enough time to go through all of the questions and to be able to talk about all of the different positives of cover crops. But another question that we received from a participant is, what is the most diverse cover crop mix you've planted at scale, 40 acres or greater, and have you seen the benefits that justify the cost for that extra seed? And Brent, I think it is, you're up.
We're pretty plain Jane when it comes to cover crops. I mean, we're planning on experimenting in the future, but we use cereal rye after all of our corn stalks, most, not all, and we use just a little bit of triticale before our bean cell, but we are planning on using some more mixes in the future. But one thing that I did want to say, and this was maybe touched about a little bit, is that we were talking maybe for a second about the financial incentives, and I know that's kind of controversial sometimes, but I know that for me and our farm and having to keep my dad on board, this is kind of important for me. And so I wanted to list off what we get for financial incentives. We do get an automatic $5 an acre off of our crop insurance. That's just automatic if we certify our cover crops. We do apply for another $5 an acre at the Illinois Department of Ag. That's something you have to apply for, like I think December 1st, that you can apply for. And we are in a carbon sequester program for ADM that we get $10 an acre for their regenerations program. That's pretty easy. And then, not really a financial incentive, but when we just met with our chemical guy for our herbicide program, we are going to be $24 an acre less on our herbicide for our rye than the 1 or 2 fields that we don't have rye. So that all comes up to about $40 to $45 an acre. And without that, I'd have a real hard time getting my dad on board on this. But now that's about our cost of getting the cereal rye. That covers the cost of the seed and the drilling. So now I can go to dad and be like, Dad, doesn't cost you a penny. It's pretty much free. That cover crop is out there and it's free. Oh, okay, well, all right. So that is pretty important on my end of things.
All right. Thank you. Adam?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, what is the most diverse mix you've planted, and have you seen the benefits to justify the extra cost?
Okay, so, and once again, this is each year specific. Yes, 16-way cover crop mix in the summertime is what we utilize. Last year was an excellent opportunity because I did have several 100 acres of prevent plant, and we were able to utilize those soils by putting a diverse cover crop mix in, and we're going to be able to capitalize on that lack of production last year, this year, when we go to plant the crop into it. We're very excited about that because we had some fields that did not take prevent plant, and we're excited to see the yield advantage that we've seen in years past again this year. Diversity is key for a multitude of reasons, and one thing we haven't went over, but I'm going to go ahead and share it. I hope it's okay. In front of my corn crop each year, there's two crops that are always in my cover crop mix. That's annual ryegrass and rapeseed. I've got to have a brassica in there for earthworm stimulation. I like that big taproot. I've got to have ryegrass in there because I want the rooting, and I want to see that fragipan broke up with the chemicals secreted from the ryegrass root. From there, we'll expand. If we can get it done quick enough, we'll have crimson in there. We'll have oats in there. We'll work with veg and as well as cereal rye. That's pretty well my program year in, year out. So at a minimum, I've always got 3 to 5 crops growing out there. This picture is picture perfect. You can see there's still some ryegrass out there, but it's heavy on the crimson, and you can see the yellow flowers or the rapeseed in the background. This would be my ideal planting experience, planting corn into it. And the soil is just so much more mellow. Our soil warms up just as fast as conventional tillage, except it stays consistent. Where on conventional tillage, you'll see the highs and lows when the clouds disappear because it has no protection. If you were to pull this back, you will see the earthworms working right at the surface, and it's instant success in my book when it comes to that. 16-way cover crop mix. I know there's guys, they'll brag about, well, I can do a 20, I can do a 30, so forth. Yeah, you can. But if you're just doing it to say that you got it out there and you're not putting enough seed per acre to make any impact, what are you really gaining to start with? I have to ask that question. I'd combat that year in, year out in the seed industry. And all too often we get excited about putting a lot of different stuff out there. And then when I ask the question, well, what's this certain plant gain you? Well, I don't know, but we're putting it out there. Yeah, but you're also paying for that. So if you don't, would your money be better spent on seeds that you know are going to benefit your particular operation? And that's the approach we take. Be mindful of what it is you're trying to achieve, and do your research on what it is that you're actually planting. Take turnips, for example. Turnips are excellent if you're going to graze it. Their root structure is poor. We haven't seen any success when it comes to building soil, so to speak, with purple top turnips. I incorporate them in my mixes sometime because we approach our soil diet much like a dietitian would approach the feed rations for cattle, because we're still dealing with biology in both. And I'll include the turnips in my mix occasionally for a different type of digestible protein. I don't understand what my biology needs to be successful. I've worked with 2 labs, and both have yet to sustain themselves. I don't know if they get bought out or what happens, but they kind of fall off. But we have to approach feeding our biology like we approach doing feed rations for cattle, because a ruminant is just like our soil. It's all biology. And that's when we add different mixes and so forth to enhance that growth.
Thank you. Greg?
I agree what Adam is saying and what Brent Brent had said here also, so I'm not going to elaborate any more on that. We've had, anywhere from 15 to 20 way mixes, and I agree with Adam too. Sometimes depending on your soil types, the year, you get variability of what species will come up. And I see in that field too, it looks like, some of the rate was in an area compared to the clovers and stuff too. And that's just the way Mother Nature is. Soil types, moisture, all sorts of variables out there that we can't control. What we've learned here the last number of years too is we want different families. Just what Adam was saying here too. You want these different families out there because they'll bring a different biological component to each one of these different families. And if you have 4 different families out of there or planted there, that will give you a very positive results as far as the biology. And it is definitely about the biology that we're working with here and we need to feed. As far as cost, they say if you're going to plant, say, just straight oats at 32 pounds or 35 pounds an acre, whatever you want to do, and then you put, say, 10 different mixes in there, you still only plant 32 pounds of the total mix. You just don't keep adding seed on top. You have to decrease your oats, and it's not difficult, but most of our seeding mixes, I think the most diverse ones even might be, depending rates, if we're going to graze them or harvest them, could be anywhere from $35 to $50 an acre. But the higher priced ones are spring peas, oats, wheat, spring barley, and that might be like $51 an acre. We put more seed in that per acre, but then that goes to grain and we harvest it also. It's a lot cheaper growing that energy than for livestock feed, for finishing rations for beef cattle, than it is growing an acre of corn. And that's all I have in that particular field, or these fields that we do. I do not put any fertility on it, nothing. We seed it in the spring and we harvest it, so it's a lot cheaper than producing corn. Plus we can, there again, in the summer after we harvest that in July, we'll put a summer annual mix in there too, and then we'll graze that in the fall, so we get a double cropping off of that also. But like I say, everything, it's amazing, from the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state and anywhere in between, we all have the same mindset, but we just have to do it a little different because of Mother Nature and our soils and that.
All right, so we're quickly running out of time this morning, so I just wanted to ask one last question of all of you, and that is, what is one message or idea that you hope the audience leaves with today? And Adam, could you kick us off?
Do your own research. Take part of your farm. Try new things, pay attention to your equipment on what's working, what's not working, and don't be afraid to spend a couple $1,000s on your planter to completely enhance your operation based off performance. Get out of the tractor seat and see what's actually taking place on your operation.
Greg?
We as farmers grow plants. That's what we do. Whether we use those as an income source, corn and beans and wheat and various other plants, using cover crops, we're just planting or seeding different plants. In one nice thing with these cover crops, they're out there longer throughout the year, which we should be delighted to see as they're, again, as farmers, because we see more green in the field, and that actually relates back to more soil life. They're, again, cleaner water, cleaner air. The whole system was what was shown here today. But everything that we should be doing is to regenerate the soil, and I believe the participants here today has shown that anyway.
Brent?
Well, yeah, well, from my earlier story, I guess I'm probably a poster child for what can go wrong if you don't do any research. But one of the things that we do on our farm that I think is different than almost all of our farmers in this area is we follow our bean combine with our old 750 drill, and we put triticale up the most erodible spots immediately after being harvested. Because, and the reason why I think that's important is we don't have a lot of erosion problems on corn stalks before beans, but we do have horrible erosion at times on bean stubble before corn. And I remember several years ago when after we had done these tests and we had proven that the reduced till and what that was just as profitable or maybe a little more profitable. I remember being so excited that the no-till we're gonna be done with all the erosion. We were gonna be done with gullies. It's gonna be so nice to not have to deal about gullies. And you know what? It wasn't the case. And I don't want to get into this, but we actually, after no-tilling for so many years, our residue decomposes so fast, it's shocking. And we started to have erosion trouble. I remember reading about that from an old guy who wrote that, and I thought he was crazy, but that happened to us. And that's where cover crops come in. And we really see the erosion still happen on soybean stubble. So if nothing else, if you don't do anything else with cover crops, if you don't want to do the whole field with cereal rye or triticale, if nothing else, take a small drill and at least drill those really erodible spots, the repeat offenders. That's what we call it on our farm, where you fill them in and they wash again even with no-till. At least on those repeat offenders, go in and get some cover crop on those areas, because the cover crop is the silver bullet when it comes to erosion control.
Thank you all.